The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Jay Ferris with Nebraska Farm Bureau, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the webinar this evening, the issue update webinar. Just a couple house cleaning or keeping tips before we get started. Just want to let everybody know that while we're going through the webinar, if anybody has a question at any time, please feel free to click on the hand icon. It raises your hand. I will be able to see that. If you have a computer with a microphone, I can unmute your microphone and you can ask that question live. If you don't want to do that, you can also type a question. There's a question box that you can type that question in and get that to us, and we'll make sure that question gets answered. So with that, I'd like to welcome our President, Steve Nelson, to do our welcome and kind of start things off. So, Steve?
Well, good evening, everyone, and certainly very happy to have all of you on this evening to get an update on what's happening at the Nebraska Legislature this year, so far this year, and the efforts of Nebraska Farm Bureau. Again, appreciate your time being here. I know that there are always a lot of other events going on and that can affect where people need to be, and I know the Nebraska basketball team is playing on the radio, or the game is on the radio at least, and maybe it's on TV as well, I'm not sure, but Nebraska was struggling a little bit at the last that I checked on it. But certainly, again, just want to welcome you here and take the opportunity now at this point to introduce Jay Rempe, who is the Vice President of our Governmental Relations Department, and Jay's going to provide an update of the legislative happenings that are going on right now in the legislature. Jay.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Good evening, everyone. This is Jay Rempe, Vice President of Governmental Relations. I'm glad to join you this evening, and glad everyone has joined us. We have invited Senator Dan Watermeyer to join us tonight, and but we're unsure. He had some other things going tonight, and so we're unsure if he was able to make it. Senator Watermeyer, if you are on, let me know, and we'll try to get you patched in so you can say a few words to everyone. But let me start, and what I want to try to do today is just run through real quick some of the issues that will be facing the legislature, the two important, more priority issues that we're working on from a Farm Bureau standpoint. And I'm going to run through it pretty quickly, kind of give you an overview of what's happening and some of the politics around it a little bit, and then open it up for questions. So, and I think as Jay Ferris said, if as we go along, if you got a question, let him know, and we'll try to get you answered. Okay. There we go. First, let me just kind of get you the lay of the land for the session. This is a long session. It's a 90-day session. It started January 7th, and it'll run through the first part of June. Senators could introduce bills during the first 10 days of the session, which that was January 21st. There were over 655 bills introduced. We said 655 plus because there was a series of budget bills introduced the Thursday after the bill introductions were done. Those are always the Speaker introduces that on behalf of the Governor to put the budget out on the floor or into the body, if you will. And then every bill that gets introduced has a hearing. It gets referenced to a committee, and then they have a hearing, and the committee decides what to do with it and how to go forward. This year is a bit unique in that we've got a lot of new faces, not only in the legislature, but obviously in the administration, with Governor Ricketts taking the helm from Governor Heineman. And so he's appointing new agency heads right now. He's developed his own budget, and he released that last week. We'll go into a bit of a detail here on that in just a bit. But there's some new players involved at the administration side. There's also a lot of new faces in the body. We have 18 new senators. 17 of them were elected just in November, coming off the campaign trail. One was appointed to replace Senator Jansen of Fremont, who was just elected as the auditor, and that's Senator Schnorr. He's a cattle feeder from Dodge County. So overall, if you kind of look at the body, it's generally thought that it's more conservative this time around. Last session, last 2 years, we had 33 Republicans. This time we have 35, a few less Democrats, and then you have your one independent, Senator Ernie Chambers. I didn't put it on the slide, but if you look at the number of farmers and ranchers or what I consider active landowners in a farming operation in the body, we probably lost a bit of ag representation that way. Last couple years we had what I'd count 13 of those kind of senators. This year only 11. So, but that doesn't mean that the folks that got elected that aren't farmers and ranchers or ag landowners aren't concerned about agriculture. It's just a little reflection of the body there. They also, in this odd session, elect new leadership. The picture you see is Galen Hadley, who is from Kearney. He is the former Revenue Committee chair, but he was elected Speaker of the body. Senator Hadley then sets the agenda each day that they will debate, the bills that they will debate on the floor. He kind of controls the flow of things, tries to keep things moving, and tries to serve as a mediator if there's some controversial issues, and he's basically in charge of kind of running the body, if you will. And then we've listed some of the other key committees that we work with from Farm Bureau. There's some new names on there as chairs. There's some names that have been there before. On Appropriations Committee, they're the ones that set the budget and determine who gets the money. Senator Mello from Omaha will remain the chair of that committee. On Revenue, we have a new senator, or new committee chair anyway, Mike Glore from Grand Island. Agriculture is new, Senator Johnson from Wahoo. Education, Senator Sullivan from Cedar Rapids remains on that committee. And then Natural Resources, Senator Shills, he used to be the chair of the Ag Committee, but he moved over to Natural Resources. And for Transportation, Jim Smith out of Papillion is the new leaders. And these are all, these leadership positions are elected by the body as a whole. So these folks were all elected by their colleagues to serve as leaders and committee chairs. Let me launch with that kind of a bit of a background, then an overview of the session. Talk a little bit about the two issues that we're going to be spending the most of our time and efforts on this session and trying to implement Farm Bureau policy. And I'm going to start with property taxes and talk a little bit about some of the bills that have been introduced, some of the things that we're working on and related to property taxes. That's the #1 priority for the organization. And on this screen, we just show some of the reasons why we're arguing that not only do property taxes in this state need to be reduced in total, because we rely as a state too heavily on them in general, but for agriculture in particular, farmers and ranchers, why they in particular need attention, if you will, when we're looking at trying to reduce the property tax burden. Last week, the Department of Revenue released their latest figures on property taxes, and these are for property taxes collected. The latest figures are from 2014, and you'll see that first bullet point there that ag land taxes increased by 162%. That's looking over the last 10 years since 2004. If you look at the growth in property taxes collected, and this is just paid on ag lands, this doesn't include personal property taxes or other forms, just on ag land, the taxes on farmers and ranchers have increased 162%. Just in the last year, we've seen a growth of 16% from 2013 to 2014, and that's just on ag land as well. If you look at total statewide growth, and I don't have that figure on top of me, but when you look at all the sectors together, the total growth in taxes, 88% of that was on ag land. So what's basically happening then is all the other sectors are basically stable, growing slightly, and you're seeing this rapid growth on ag land. And just for comparison purposes, if I use that 162% figure over the last 10 years, on residential properties, that same figure would be only 40%. So we're seeing a shift from other property sectors onto ag land. And then lastly, we have the dubious distinction this year for the first time. Taxes on ag land exceeded $1 billion. That's never occurred before. And to put that in perspective, total property taxes collected on all property sectors by every local entity is upwards around $3.6 billion. And so that ag land is 29% of the total. Oops. Sorry, went the wrong way there. So setting that stage, what are we looking for in terms of Farm Bureau for property tax relief? Well, we announced last week we've kind of created what we call, we're terming, I guess, our foundation, what we think has to be part of a property tax reduction package, or at least the basis of the beginning of the discussions there. And the first element that we're pushing on is somehow, given the tremendous increases that we've seen on ag land, we've got to target farmers and ranchers specifically for some relief. And we think we can do that a couple ways. One is we're looking at reducing the ag land value. And there are a couple bills that have been introduced that take a little different twist of trying to do that. First was LB 178 by Senator Watermeyer from Syracuse. And the hearing on that bill is up Thursday in front of the Revenue Committee. So if anyone's on here and want to weigh in with the Revenue Committee on that, that'd sure be appreciated. But what it does is reduces ag land values, or the taxable value on ag land, from 75% of market, as it is currently, down to 55%, but that's for schools only. And it would phase it in over 4 years. So you'll see a reduction over 4 years. What would happen then is you'd see a shift in who's paying those local property taxes for schools. The other bill, LB 350, was introduced by Senator Brosh of Bancroft. And it would just straight out reduce ag land values for all local governments, the taxable value, from 75 to 65%. And so it's a couple different ways to approach the problem. We're calculating that if with at least LB 350, it's a little more difficult for the schools only, but for LB 350, that would equate in a minimum of property tax savings for farmers and ranchers of about $80 million. And if the schools show some spending restraint and the additional state aid dollars that would be kicked in because of the way the formula is structured, that could easily approach $100 million. And obviously, we'd like to see it get closer to $100 million to maximize those property tax savings. A couple of keys on that is doing that will provide direct relief to farmers and ranchers, and it's something everybody would be uniform across the state, where everyone would see the same percent value reduction. And some argue, they use the nasty word, that the shift, because other property tax sectors would, like homeowners and some commercial properties, would pay more. But we argue it's a shift to better balance, that what you've seen, just the figures that I gave you a little bit ago, we've seen a shift onto agriculture, we got to shift back. So that's one of the parts of the foundation, as we call it. The second part is there's a program that the state has had in place since '07 called the Property Tax Credit Program. What happens there is the legislature allocates money into this fund, and then that money is distributed directly back out to the local governments, and it acts as a credit against the property taxes that you pay. And so it's about $140 million right now. Agriculture, again, probably gets around a third of those dollars coming out. We're working with Senator Watermeyer on a bill that would put another $60 million in it. And there are other bills that have been introduced that would range anywhere from $20 to $60 million. And so we're working to try to get more money in that property tax credit program. And if we can get the $60 million in there, like we're asking, and Senator Watermeyer sits on the Appropriations Committee, that would be worth another $20 million of property tax relief for agriculture. And the neat thing about this program, it's dollar for dollar relief. Some of the other programs, like state aid to schools, that gets filtered in through the state aid formula, it doesn't always reach right out and directly reduce your property taxes where this does. So it's a dollar for dollar relief. So that's the next part of our foundation. And finally, and those two things, let me go back. Those are two things that we think that can be done this year that can result in direct on-the-ground savings for you, that you can sit down with a napkin and figure out real quick how much dollars that would mean to you on your farm and ranch. The second part of our foundation, if you will, is somehow we've got to get a handle and reform state aid and K-12 funding of schools, because, as you know, 2/3 of those property tax dollars go to fund schools. And so one idea, there's a lot of bills that have been thrown in that make changes to state aid formula. One that we've thrown in or working with Senator Brosh on would do a couple things that we think would be beneficial. One, it would return 20% of the income taxes collected in every school district. It would return those income taxes back to that school district. Secondly, in the state aid formula there's a minimum levy penalty. So if your school doesn't levy a certain levy rate, it gets penalized, and they subtract income tax dollars already going back to the district and state aid going back to the district. They subtract that, and so sometimes school districts will artificially keep levies higher than they need to because they don't want to lose state aid. And so those are a couple things that we think could direct a lot of dollars back out to rural schools in particular. And the neat thing about the 20% income tax rebate is every school district would receive that. Right now we have we're going to be pushing close to, I've heard, 150 school districts that no longer receive equalization aid through the state aid formula, and that's because of the rising ag land values. And so this would be a way that you could assure that every district receives some form of state assistance. The other part of that is because a lot of those unequalized districts are rural districts, they're high in ag land values. Those districts that are not receiving state aid now are the ones that would benefit the most. And then because of the minimum, if we remove the minimum levy penalty, those districts that are trying to be frugal, trying to hold the line on tax rates, even with the rising values, they wouldn't be penalized in the formula. So this a concept we've thrown in. Again, it's part of a lot of things that have been thrown in on state aid, but we're hoping that it'll generate some discussion around that, and we think it could bring about some significant property tax relief and a restructuring of the school funding system. And I'll note we just found out today that the hearing on this bill in front of the Education Committee is next Monday. And so if that's something that you have an interest in, and we certainly encourage you to contact members of the Education Committee, and if you're interested in testifying, come give us a call and we'll work with you on that. Lastly, one other idea that we're playing with, and we've had a little bit of discussions with some folks about, is how can we prevent the problem from getting worse from a value standpoint. Because of the way the system works, we expect some continued value growth across the state in ag land. So are there some things that we can do to restrict that, to add some more stability to the system so you won't see double-digit growth? It sounds easy in concept, but when we were working with some folks to perhaps draft some legislation to introduce it, it gets very, very difficult in a big hurry. But we haven't given up on the idea yet. It might be something that as we move forward in some of the discussions, maybe we'll be able to work something out and move that kind of an idea forward as well.
Jay?
I mentioned these are kind of the ideas. Yep. Jay, did you say something?
Yeah,
yep.
We do have a question here, and I think it was kind of maybe on your last slide here, but it was when it talked about the income taxes, how much would income taxes have to raise to handle this?
Well, and that's the great question, because I should have mentioned that. Right now, today, the way the state aid formula is set up, about 12% of the income tax dollars collected in a school district go back to that school district. And so what we're proposing to do would not increase income taxes at all. And in fact, this 20% provision was the law back in the early 90s. So we're arguing that it made sense to do it back in the early 90s for a variety of reasons. In the middle to late 90s, they capped the amount that is rebated back to school districts now, but that's the beauty of this, is it would not require any kind of increase at the income tax at the state level, which as everyone probably aware, the politics of trying to raise taxes right now is difficult at best. Were there any other questions, Jay? Or
There we go.
Well, I'll
yeah, I don't, at this time, I think, no, there are no other questions. So,
okay.
But again, I will go ahead and point out that if anybody does have a question, they can certainly type that into the question box, or if they raise their hand, I will see that, and I can unmute their microphone as well, too.
All right, well, I'll continue on until you tell me to shut up, Jay. So I want to hit on a few of the other ideas that are out there. Governor Ricketts gave his State of the State address last Thursday. In it, he included some of his budget proposals. There's a couple things, obviously, that we're very pleased that he included in his budget ideas, and they parallel very closely and nicely with what some of the ideas we have. But first, he included in the property tax credit program, he wants to boost that amount up, and he wants to put in $120 million over the next 2 years, which would be $60 million a year, like we had asked for with Senator Watermeyer's bill. So we were very pleased to see that. Secondly, he included money in the budget to because when you lower ag land values, that results in more state aid. He included money in his budget to drop ag land down to 65%. One difference in what we're thinking and what the governor proposed was he wants to phase it in to limit the state budget exposure, to make it a little easier to swallow in the state budget. So, but that concept or idea of dropping ag land values was something that he included in his budget proposal, which again we think is good. So there's a couple things that came from Governor Ricketts that we thought were helpful. Another idea that's out there, Senator Al Davis from Hyannis has been working with a think tank, I guess, if you will. It's called the Open Sky. Out of, I believe they're out of Omaha. They are primarily using the state aid formula as a way to try to drive property taxes. This has a lot of different moving parts and bells and whistles. It would include the implementation of a local income tax. That local income tax would be levied by your school, and it would amount to either 19% or it could go as high as 29% of your state income tax liability, and that'd be up to the school board to determine that amount. It would provide every school district with $500 of what they call foundation aid, which is a per student. It would ensure that every student at least got $500 from the state. It does phase in a reduction in property tax levies over time. I want to say it was a 5-year phase-in from the present maximum of $1.05 down to roughly about 80 cents, and then it drops ag land values just for state aid purposes only. It wouldn't affect your taxable value that you'd pay locally to the school, but just in the state aid formula, it would drop ag land down to 65%. The Open Sky estimates that this would decrease property taxes by $407 million, and again, that would be mostly funneled through the state aid formula. It would increase taxes by $368 million at the local level, and then state aid roughly increase of about $39 million. There's some intrigue around this plan. It kind of represents one end of the spectrum, if you will. Some ideas are out there. Obviously, there's a lot of angst over raising income taxes. There's not a lot of, in fact, there's a lot of ideas on the opposite side of that, of trying to reduce income tax rates from some of the business community and others. So this one, it's more comprehensive, it's bigger, a lot of moving parts again, but it's got some things in it that are, I think, going to be kind of hard for some folks to swallow. But the other idea that's out there is kind of on the other end of the political spectrum. Senator Jim Smith from Papillion, he introduced a plan that kind of came from the Platte Institute up in Omaha. And again, I talked a little bit about reducing income taxes. What they're trying to do is phase in excuse me, income tax reductions over 10 years and basically reducing the top rates for the top income brackets, which kick in at about I think it's $29,000 now, and then it would put more money in the property tax credit program. So that's kind of the other end of the spectrum. There's a little interest in reducing income taxes, but I think most of the body would probably agree that this one doesn't go far enough in trying to address property tax problems. So those are kind of the two extremes, if you will, of the plans, the comprehensive plans that are out there. And from our standpoint, we're working to try to find an area in the middle based around those concepts and foundations that I talked about earlier, where we can build a base from the middle out and work with senators on trying to get as much property tax relief as we can. Now, there's a lot of other ideas out there regarding sales and income taxes. There's a bill that's been thrown in to increase the sales tax rate by 0.5% and put the dollars into the property tax credit program. There's a bill about taxing the excessive price on ag land sales and using those dollars to fund a tax credit for ag land. There's a bill to raise the tax on capital gains to fund property tax relief. There's some bills out there to funnel target homeowners for property tax relief. So there's a lot of ingredients, I guess, in this legislative stew this year related to property taxes, and we're going to try to work hard to, again, find that area in the middle where we can bring the most senators together to target some property taxes for agriculture in particular, but just reduce property taxes in general. So just real quick, some of the key committees that are going to be involved in this. You see some of the members of those committees. The Revenue Committee there obviously will be heavily involved on the tax side of things in terms of the tax structure. And then on the Education Committee, they'll be the ones that are handling the state aid side of these things and the how the state aid and the property taxes affect that. And then finally the Appropriations Committee that will decide how much dollars get spent in each one of these categories, or work with these two committees to decide how many dollars will be used. So those are the folks that will be putting the most time and effort into this, and you can bet that those folks will probably get tired of listening to us by the end of the session. But we're going to work closely with some of the rural senators that serve on these committees. Obviously, you see Senator Brosh is on the Revenue Committee, and so she's carrying a couple of those bills that we have an interest in, and so she's in a good spot. And then Senator Watermeyer on the Appropriations Committee. So, and we have some good folks on these committees that I think want to try to work towards some property tax relief. Just a little note on what we're trying to do related around the property tax relief. You should have seen an action alert that just went out today. Jay Ferris sent it out that talks a little more in depth about some of these bills that we're advocating, and asking you to contact your state senator about those bills, and particularly those two bills that I mentioned, LB 178 and LB 351, that have hearings coming up here in the next few days. To the extent you can contact your senator and indicate support for those and for property tax relief, that'd be very helpful. And then we've organized some local town hall meetings. President Nelson is going out on the road to visit with the local members about the efforts on property tax, and visit with some of the local media, and just get some exposure and let people know that we need their help trying to get the message out that we need property tax relief. And I think Jay Ferris will correct me if I'm wrong here in a little bit, but we start in Hastings Thursday morning. Yep. With a breakfast meeting, and then go to Sydney Thursday evening, and then Friday finish up with a breakfast in Ogallala, and a lunch meeting in North Platte. So I'll let Jay jump in. Yep. Jay, do you want to add something to that in a little bit?
No, that's correct, Jay. We'd love to see as many people at any of those locations, and to kind of give an update on that. Hastings will be at Perkins at 8 o'clock in the morning. In Sydney, we'll be at Buffalo Point Steakhouse, and that's going to be at 6:30 Mountain Time out there in Sydney. And that's on Thursday, the 29th. The 30th, then we will start in Ogallala at Denny's at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then we'll be back in noon at North Platte at the Canteen Grill. And so if you're close to any of those areas, we'd love to see you stop by. We'll talk more about the Tax Relief Now plan and more of what Jay had talked about, but also individual things that you can do to help work on that. I don't know, Jay, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but at least in my time, I don't know that there's ever been quite the same opportunities we've had to maybe actually see some real property tax relief. Is something that I know we've been working on a long time. So that's yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say I agree with you, Jay. I think that we've got a confluence of things that are happening this year with the new governor and a new legislature with 18 members that just came off the campaign trail, and they heard property taxes. So I think we have a unique opportunity to try to get some things done this year, and need to get everybody involved in that.
And that being said, it's not going to be something that's easily done either. We're going to need everybody's help to get it to get it through. And if you go on to the next slide too, you had mentioned the action alert that I sent out just before the webinar started this evening. So when we get off the webinar, check your email, and you can take action on this action alert. And basically what we're asking for is support of the concepts that are in those 4 bills that Jay had talked about. With that, if you aren't on our action alert list, you can go to our website, which is www.nefb.org, and click on the red box that says Act Now, Protect Your Rights to Farm and Ranch. Click on that, and you'll be taken to our Take Action page. And it's a very simple way for you. You put in your contact information. Very simple way for you to communicate with your elected official, and a place for you to actually fill in your message. We have a sample message in there, but please feel free to change that so you can sure take that opportunity to tell your story on how property taxes are affecting your farm or ranch. I do see a question, Shane, you're asking. It is at noon in North Platte. It is Central Time, and just shoot me an email if you want to come. We'd love to have you, and let me know how many. And the only reason we need to know that is so the restaurant has enough to handle us. So.
All right.
I think that's everything I've got. So go.
Okay.
Unless there's any questions on any other of that. So.
Yeah. Before I move on to another issue, let me see if there's any other questions or anything on property taxes.
Well, we do have one here.
Okay.
So LB 178, it's 55% for schools only. Every other taxing authority remains at 75% on ag land. Is that correct?
Yep, that is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. And the reason we structured that in the way we did, it's an idea that Levon Heidemann actually came up with when he was a senator, and had thrown it in a couple times. But as I mentioned earlier, the core of the problem, where 2/3 of the property taxes go to fund local schools, that's where the core of the problem is. And I think that's where the most imbalance is, if you will. If you look at what a farmer and rancher will pay on their land to support their local school versus somebody in town. So the thought was one, we could attack that problem directly by reducing the ag land values down to 55%, and then try to more equally disperse that burden. But then secondly, you're not, from a political standpoint, to be honest, you're maybe negating some of the opposition to that from other local entities like counties and NRDs and things.
Okay. Don't see any other questions at this point. So.
Well, I'll move right on into our, I think we just have one more slide, Jay.
Okay.
Oops, 2 more. There we go. All right, sorry. The old finger is going crazy here. The one other area that I want to touch on tonight that we're trying to make a priority is livestock growth. And if I would have been thinking ahead of time, I would have thrown some charts up here in our PowerPoint. But if you look at Nebraska and what we've seen happen over the last 10 to 12 years in growth of our livestock industry in pure numbers, if you will, relative and compared to other states, we're starting to fall behind. And let me give you an example. Like and this was in a University of Nebraska report that came out last year, but in our annual market hog inventory, over the last, I believe it's over the last 10 years, Nebraska has seen a growth of 3% on our total annual market hog inventory. Iowa has seen a growth of 32%, Minnesota 20%, Kansas 7%. Dairy cow inventory. Nebraska, we've actually declined by 17%. Colorado's grown 38%, Kansas 18%, South Dakota 10%. Egg production, Nebraska is down 10%, Iowa up 67%, Illinois up 42%. So you get the story. So 2 or 3 years ago, Farm Bureau, along with a lot of other ag groups, started sitting down and talking about, okay, what can we do to try to turn this trend around, and how can we get some growing this industry again. And out of those discussions, there's obviously AFAN is focusing on helping grow the industry. We're working with local county farm bureaus on getting counties identified as livestock friendly and trying to build some support there. But there were some policy things that we identified that we thought were causing some problems and maybe restraining growth here in Nebraska versus other states. And so there was a series of bills introduced this year to try to get at each one of those issues and have a discussion about these issues and how we can grow the livestock industry in the state. The first is LB 106 that Senator Watermeyer introduced. That bill actually came out of some discussions that we and the other ag groups have been having with the county officials. And there was a work group put together of 10 people made up of county commissioners, zoning administrators, and others on one side, and actual livestock producers on the other side. And we looked at, we looked at two things primarily. One was the livestock siting process and county zoning and some problems there. The other was economic development tools and things that that maybe counties need to help promote livestock growth in their counties. So 106 came out of the zoning side of that discussion. And basically what it does is try to balance local control, still give counties the zoning authority. They still get to make the decision of whether or not they want to require a permit on a livestock operation. But on the other side, it provides some more certainty and uniformity across the state. So if I'm a livestock producer and I want to grow, I have a little better understanding of what's expected of me to get my permit. And it does that by, once a county decides it's going to require a permit, then it would look at a matrix that would help the county evaluate whether that is a good project or not. And the decision by the county then would be weighed by that project. So it's ultimately the county's decisions, but this just kind of puts some parameters around that decision and helps them focus in on making the best decision possible. So that's LB 106. The other bill that kind of grew out of some discussions with the county folks and others is LB 175. That was introduced by Senator Ken Shields, whose picture's on the screen there. That's called the Livestock Growth Act. It does a couple things. It would go into our tax incentive programs that we have at the state. There's already some incentives in there in place for livestock. It would try to update those and make them a little more attractive for investment in livestock in the state. And then the other part of the bill, it would create a program within the Department of Agriculture to provide grants to counties, and it would try to target, I think, livestock-friendly counties and say, okay, you're livestock-friendly. What can we do to help you start to market your county? Look at planning some strategies you could adopt to try to attract livestock growth to your county. Or if you've got some livestock projects looking at your county, maybe there's some infrastructure needs. Maybe you need to put in a new bridge. Maybe you need to widen a turning lane on a highway or something, or a road. So the trucks can get out of the way of traffic. There's LB 176, which is an issue that was brought up last year in the legislature. If you look at Nebraska compared to some of these other states, one of the things that they can do in other states is the packers can contract directly with the individual producer to raise hogs for them. And so the producer will put up the building and will provide the labor and will feed the hogs and raise the hogs, but the packers retain ownership. And they found that's a great way to get some young people into the business. They'll put up a building, and through this contract they can help pay it off and then eventually become an independent producer on their own. We cannot do that in Nebraska. Our state law prohibits packers from contracting with local producers. And so that's something that we're looking at as a way to try to expand the opportunities and maybe another way to bring some younger people back to the farm and let them get into farming through livestock production. So those are a series of bills that have been introduced. I'm not aware of any of the hearing dates on those bills yet, but those are some areas that we're working with a lot of our other ag partners to try to put some things in place to help grow the industry. So, Jay, I think, and Steve, I've talked enough, and so I just tonight wanted to hit on a couple of our priority issues that we're going to be working on pretty hard, and I'll be happy to answer any questions anybody might have.
Okay. Well, we do have a couple of questions that came in, Jay, and these are actually going back to the property tax issue and the taxes, but the first one is there any easy available information to see what the effect of dollars would be by the reduction from 75 down to 65%? And then the other question that ties into that is, what would the amount, if we increase income tax to 19%, how does that, we need to have an idea on how that would affect school districts.
Two great questions. Let me tackle the first one first. We have crunched some numbers, and that's where we came up with the statewide numbers, and that's where we came up with the $80 to $100 million on a statewide basis. There was a report that was put out by the Revenue Committee last fall that tried to go in and look a little more in detail and go in and looked. What they did is say, let's say you're a landowner and you have $2 million worth of property, and you're located in this county, in this school district. What would happen to your taxes by dropping ag land down? And if somebody's interested, they can shoot me an email where they're located, and I could look into that report and try to get you the specifics. Or if you wanted to go do a little search on the legislature's webpage, and go to the Revenue Committee site, I think they have it up on that site too, and you can do a little digging in the actual report yourself and find where you're located, and might be able to give you a little more in-depth detail there. And then, I'm sorry, Jay, the second question was, the sales tax.
Yeah, the 19%.
And what that would mean for school districts.
How does that affect school districts? That's another good question, and I can't answer that one quite as easily, because it's triggered, or it's attached on to your state tax liability. So I guess for an individual to think about it and look at it on their own, just go back and look at your state tax liability from last year and add 19% onto that would be what you would be paying. From a school district wide, I haven't seen any numbers yet that break it down by school district, but I think by the time we get to the hearing on that, get a little closer to hearing, probably some of that will be coming out. Okay. Another question we have here is, on hog contracting, do you think packer ownership will hurt the current independent producers with price control? If the packers drive prices low enough, will the independents lose money?
Mm-hmm. That's another good question, and that's a concern that we've heard on that issue. I guess let me tackle it from a couple different ways. One, in other states that has, like Iowa, for example, that allows this, we haven't seen that. We haven't seen where the independent producer has seen lower prices relative to the folks that are contracting out, and so experience would show there that hasn't been an issue. Secondly, to the extent that there already is some contracting going on in the state of Nebraska, it's just not connected with any packer right now. And so in an odd sort of way, this would increase the competition for the number of folks out there that a local producer could try to contract with and compare and contrast and try to get their best deal. And so, but that's always a concern, and it's one that we've talked about a bunch, just making sure while we want to provide opportunities, we don't want to do anything to make sure we close doors on the other side of it either.
Okay. I think Richard has a question that I'm going to unmute his microphone to see if he's... Richard, are you there?
Yes, the thing that I was wondering back on the question about the lowering the percentage of real estate tax and then increasing the income tax, is there any information by school district that would provide an idea of what kind of change it would take to balance that?
That's a great question, and I haven't seen it yet. But that doesn't mean it won't be coming out. Particularly where this idea came out of that Open Sky Institute, I imagine they've been doing some number crunching, and they might have that, Richard, at some point by school, kind of look at how that would balance out by school district. And we could when we get that out, we could let people know to go take a look at it.
That should help, because the school districts in the rural areas are going to be concerned about losing too much money and maybe having to turn right around and try to raise the real estate tax up to make up the loss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the bill does have a phase down where you it tries to reduce the levy limits over time. One of the concerns I guess I have with it phases that in, but it gives the school districts the income tax ability right away, and so the timing of it is a little bit of a puzzle to me. So, and you know, on the broad scale, I shared with you statewide, it would reduce taxes, property taxes by $400 million, increase income taxes by, I think it was $368 million. How that all shakes out at the local level is tough to tell, but we'll be on the lookout for some information on that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I have another, I guess this is a comment, but it's if we can get property taxes lower, this relates to the livestock expansion issue, but if we get property taxes lower, we'll see an increase in livestock expansion, and doesn't think zoning is the issue necessarily. So,
mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and that's a good point. And one of the things that when we've had the discussions with the counties, that I think has kept them engaged in the discussion partly is they see some opportunities for some livestock growth and adding to their property tax base and helping disperse that a little bit. So that's one of the reasons that they're kind of interested in this, and so that's a good point.
Okay. Well, I don't know if we're having any other questions. I don't see any other questions at this point, but certainly if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand. We can unmute your microphone, or if you want to type it in the question box, we can certainly take it that way too. I'm not seeing any, so we must have answered their questions. One thing that I will just like to point out, once again, I do want to thank everybody that was on the webinar this evening. We are planning on a series of these webinars throughout the legislative session, roughly about every other week. I think you should have gotten emails that have all of the dates that we have so far. Please click on those and get registered for any of those webinars. They're open to any Farm Bureau member, or even those folks that you might want to let know so they can understand what Farm Bureau is doing on their behalf for farmers and ranchers as well too. You know, again, we'll have more of these, and if you have any comments or things we can make these better, please let us know that as well too. We did have, we're hoping Senator Wandermeyer could be on this evening, and he wasn't able to, but that's one of our plans this year, that we're wanting to maybe include some special guests with some elected officials on to kind of maybe talk about some of their bills and some of the things they're working on as well too. So we're hoping to have those. So stay tuned on that regard. So I don't see anything else for questions wise. So Jay or Steve, do you want to close things out?
Well, I certainly would like to thank everyone for being on and hope that this has been helpful. Would remind everyone that if you have any questions, be sure and let us know. Any comments, be sure and let us know. Either call me or either of the Jays, and we will get answers for you, or certainly take any comments that you have. And as was mentioned earlier, as we move forward in working, particularly, well, on all of these issues, we need your help. We need everyone to be involved in the process, and so we want to help you in every way that we can to be part of that, and look forward to your support. So with that, I would say good evening to all of you, and thank you again for being a part of this webinar.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Steve. And I do have one other final question here, and that is the legislative conference, which is actually the Ag Edge conference this year, and it is the 19th and 20th of February. So I will send that information out on how to get registered to that. But if anybody else has questions on that, please feel free to let us know as well too. So once again, thank you everyone for being on this evening, and we will see you in a couple weeks when we do this again.